Here we are, getting into territory that I'm much more comfortable talking about. Not being a professional at anything, not being a professional at anything I'm talking about at all, but being much less confident in that timeline before the current year. So we've finally arrived at, we're going to get to the 1800s today, and a couple of names that you're very familiar with, and you're heavily influenced by one way or another, even if you don't know it. But as we talk about the stuff going forward, it's going to sound very familiar even if you've never thought about it consciously. We've been through these periods in history, in our local history, which is to say Western history. And it's funny because Western history, all things Western are under attack and have been for decades. And we're in the middle of some kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, resurgence of confidence in Western civilization. And usually those things continue to build. I don't know where it goes. It never goes. The timeline never goes back to a previous time, but it forks and it goes somewhere else. And we're in a time of resurgence of Western confidence. Not too soon to suit me. I can tell you that right now. And I would expect that there would be a return to, there may be some kind of, not a revival, but resurgence of Christianity as well in the United States. I hope so. And in Europe, for that matter. A lot going on in Europe right now. It's all related. Instability everywhere. You know, when we came out of the Soviet era, I don't know what we were expecting, but the end result was actually a much more unstable world coming out of the Soviet era. That's an interesting outcome when the Soviet Union basically collapsed in 1990. Or was it 91? I don't remember. I was at the Pentagon at the time, but doesn't matter. We'll talk about it later. So here's the timeline we've been working through. We talked about the period, just the early period after the formation of the church, where it was decentralized and you had this federation of bishops. Basically, you had a loose coalition of leaders of churches, and there was no centralized leadership of the church. And that all changed with Gregory. And now we have very, very much a period of centralization within the church and infusion of it in the culture through some sort of state managed system. And so that's almost Marxist the way that I said that. But anyway, all due to Constantine. And so that lasted a long time until the Renaissance, which was right here in this period, when we see a fracture of centralization and central control and church authority begins to fracture. As the rallying cry back to the sources. Look, if your whole system depends on everybody having to go through you because you mandate the use of the Latin translation of the Bible, and then all of a sudden the rallying cry is back to the sources, and then there's this push to get the Bible into the hands of individuals in their own language, well, by definition, you're going to see a fracture of centralization, of central control, represented most acutely by the priesthood and the Latin Bible. And so that fractures in the Reformation, which was a result of the Renaissance. But then, of course, out of that comes a backlash, Catholic backlash, and we have the Counter-Reformation. And then by 1618, we begin this period of literal violence, religious violence, Protestants versus Catholics, which turns political, and you know, different sides vying for political control and so forth. And it launches this 30-year period called the 30 Years' War, which was religious and political and ended up being national. And what comes out of that period, 1618 to 1648, is a whole new Europe with the Treaty of Westphalia, where you have now sovereign nations in Europe, each its own thing. And Europe, what?
What was it before that? Was it just like tribal type?
Holy Roman Empire, and It's all a result of the fracture of papal control. Roman control, the control of Rome. And there was an attempt to bring that back. It didn't work. And so once that happened, you know, it turns out probably, I'm guessing that religious control was what fused Europe together. And now that was broken, I mean, it is ethnic. I wouldn't say tribal necessarily, not in the sense that we understand tribal. As I understand tribal in, for example, Africa, where there are 26 different languages in South Africa, and there's all these different tribes, and that's their identity. It's the same thing in might be the same thing in India or Pakistan. But now you're going to have France for the French and Germany for the Germans and so on and so forth. You're still going to have a state church, the Lutheran Church and the Church of England and so forth. But this is fundamentally discrediting to the church and its authority and its legitimacy. So as you see this, as you see the lowering tide of church authority, at the same time, you're going to see the rising tide of secularism. And we're going to talk about naturalism in a minute, Darwinism and Marxism, which are, in my view, almost two sides of the same coin. But out of this also comes the United States, this period of time known as the 30 Years' War, or in the middle of it. So in that sense, we're a reaction. The United States is a reaction, a backlash against what was going on the continent. It's fundamentally transformative, which would have a hand in the breakdown of the British Empire. You know, these empires, which has become much more official with World War I. You know, you still have these, you know, these shells of empires, even in World War I, right? You have Tsarist Russia and you have the British Empire. The United States wasn't even hardly a factor yet, but it will be, especially after World War II. So
how did the 30 Years' War affect the United States or America?
When did the Puritans come here? When did this war start? I mean, is that a coincidence? You know, what are they escaping? Not that they were libertarians either. But anyway, so we talked about these two periods. You have the pre-modern period, which we spent a long time on, which was religious in its worldview and in its narrative. I use the word narrative a lot because every society has to have a story that it tells itself about its origins and its justification and its legitimacy. And if you lose confidence in that narrative, you're in a lot of trouble. And that's what's happened in the United States. There were forces, which we'll talk about, which self-consciously attempted to subvert and delegitimize and the narrative about Western civilization and its greatness. And it was very, very successful. And so Western civilization lost its confidence, which is exactly why what's going on in Europe right now is going on in Europe. It's a mess. And I don't know what's going to come out. We might be in just as much of a transformative period for Europe as we were back in the 1800s, but it's just a mess. Are you following what's going on in Spain?
No.
Oh my goodness, riots, and it's a mess. And France, yeah.
Why? Is it because of the Muslim influence?
Yes, immigration, yeah. I mean, in that sense, you can think of immigration as the program. There's a difference between immigration and the program of immigration, immigrationalization, if you will. And that's what's been going on. And so that is part of in my view, a delegitimizing process. The way you subvert and delegitimize is you do that. And
they're not immigrating to become part of the new culture.
Yeah, that's not what the point of immigration is. Yeah, the point of the immigrationalization as a program is to change it, is to transform it.
Change the country they're going to.
Yes, not them, because a lot of those people don't want to change it. They're coming to assimilate. But the people that are responsible for the program for the phenomenon, you know, the phenomenon itself, that's what they want, the transformation. It's very obvious from the city level to the national level. And it doesn't have the, like Marxism itself, it doesn't have the effect that they think it will. And we'll look at some quotes, a few quotes that'll be exactly that, like with the sexual revolution. Dorothy May has a quote about the sexual revolution. And the people that unleash these things, it never has the result that they want it to have. So for example, San Francisco wants to be the first carless society, or the first carless city. So you may, and the rezoning thing, where they want to do away with single family owner occupied, and everybody lives in an apartment and they use public transportation. It's not going well. It never produces the world that they aim at. So, you know, we'll get back to that. Hi, Tom.
Morning. I've jumped in the middle here, so I may be way off the base. But one of the illustrations of that is even the immigration clubs that come into being, it's Italian American,
Mhm.
not American
Yeah.
Italian. So that tells you what culture they are loyal to.
That's right.
First. And
Look at Minneapolis.
yeah, what Gary is saying is absolutely true.
Yeah.
They don't come here to integrate into our society. They want all the blessings and benefits, but
Yeah, and it turns out that may not be true for large segments of, and that's what we found out in the 2024 election, especially among Hispanics. We're off base here, but
sorry.
they didn't. It didn't go the way that everybody, including me, thought it was going to go. I didn't understand the way that a lot of these people were thinking. So it's still unfolding, but we'll get back to that.
So the interests that are behind a lot of this partially would be Marxism, partially Muslim.
Well, you have to, if you have a, yeah, now we're into the 21st, we're into the 20th and 21st centuries. Let's wait a little bit on that so we don't miss, so we can set that up with Darwin and Marx have far more influence on everyday life and culture in the United States in the 21st century than most people think. So we'll go ahead and we'll talk about it here, and then we can get back to the word that's going to continually come to my mind is, and that I'm going to say is subversion. There's a subversive, a very self-conscious subversive mindset behind what's going on today. The question is, what are they wanting to subvert, and who are they? What are they wanting to subvert? And why are they wanting to subvert? And what do they want to subvert to? What is the world they're aiming at? And we'll talk about all that later. Christianity is fundamentally in the middle of that mix because that's one of the things that that is attempting to be subverted.
The subvert means
The church.
go against the existing.
Undermine. Yeah.
which was true of the early years of our country for Christianity. Christianity wanted to be the influence and even taking over Native Americans.
Yes.
I mean, so it's.
Yeah.
It's been
The
around.
one thing we keep leaving out of all of this is it's truly, I think almost all of this is truly about God allowing Satan to have some of his reign because Satan said, I'm going to be over God. God kind of said, like he did with Job, go ahead, but I'm going to restrain. God is still restraining with his Holy Spirit. He's allowing things to go along, but you know, as we just see all of this, we see it starting to fit into that plan to bring in an Antichrist all the way along. He's first separated all the people. They had separate nations. That's exactly what he wanted, but we keep trying to put it all back like we did back the beginning, where we're not going to separate. We're going to be able to reach God. We're going to, you know, and it's this pull and tug all along. There's a spiritual thing behind all of it. It's not just all about men. And so God says, okay, we're gonna allow men to be here for a certain amount of time. He's got a deadline, and when that deadline hits, we're gone. Then there's the tribulation, then there's the millennium, and then eventually he brings in his own kingdom, and Satan is finally, I mean, he's already been defeated by Christ, but there's going to be a final day for him where he's no more evermore. He's totally seized. He totally can't be God. It's not just about men. It's also about what's going on between God and Satan trying to prove himself. It really is. That's going along too. And we can see our part, but it's really hard to see things from God's part. You know, people hate the idea of death, but God doesn't see that the same way as we do, because that death is going to bring us actually closer to him if we know him.
I agree with all that.
Yeah, yeah,
So here we are. We've talked about this modern era where we see God retreating from the public sphere, post-enlightenment, enlightenment and post-enlightenment, with the delegitimizing and fracturing of church authority. But this idea of that man is personal, it's going to come back down to personal identity for me. What we see today is, in my view, fundamentally an identity crisis. One of the things that the cultural forces that have basically gained supremacy in the United States, one of the things that they've done, and done self-consciously, is the subversion of personal identity. And fundamental of that is the idea that you were created in the image of God. And so we'll get back to that too, but that is still there at the populist level. Science will undergo a very secularizing force, but at the populist level, created in the image of God still held sway at this point, 1600, 17, 1800, and even today. It's never gone away. That's why it's a top-down attempt. The human heart is another thing. God operates in the human heart. He operates at all levels, but he chooses when and where he's going to do that. But he controls the human heart, and he controls the nations. And the nations think they can control the human heart. They can't, at least not over the long term, because they're dealing with a creator. Even just because you don't acknowledge him doesn't mean he went away. He's just, you didn't acknowledge. He doesn't care. He's not affected by the fact that you won't acknowledge him. We'll get back to that too. Anyway, I'm about to go on a rant, so I'm going to stop there. All right, so that takes us through the modern period on our timeline, this timeline right here. And now we can begin to talk about what comes out of the 30 Years' War, and then really just I'm going to skip over the United States because I'm not an American history guy. I'm not any history guy, but I'm particularly not an American history guy. And then we can get into Marxism and Darwin. And notice that both names are now associated with an ism, right? Marxism and Darwinism have behind them Marx and Darwin. We'll get back to that. But now we're into the 1800s. Let's just jump to there, I think. And let's see. Yeah. So these two guys here, Karl Marx and Charles Darwin. Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, although Das Kapital is supposed to be his most important work. He wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859. And both of them claim a scientific understanding of history. And in Marx's case, a scientific understanding of economics and class struggle and that sort of thing, which we'll get back to. In Darwin's case, the evolution of life on planet Earth. So let's take a look at Marx for a sec, since he came first. These are some quotes from Marx. Very straightforward, very open. My object in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism. That should sound very familiar to those who are students of culture today. Both of those are under assault in our culture. We will probably elect a socialist mayor in the disaster that is New York, and they will continue to get more disastrous. And a socialist, where else is this other socialist? They're on the resurgence on that, in that part of the political spectrum. They're on the resurgence as a reaction against the reaction against them. So I don't know where that's going to go. But anyway, that's Marx. Let's see some other thing. Keep people away from their history, and they are easily controlled. He's not saying that to mean teach them their history, or they will be controlled. He wants control. So, and if you can't keep them away from their history, change the history. Historical revisionism. Here's his enemy. Wealth is the enemy. We'll get back to his conflict of interest on this. One pole is the same as accumulation of misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, mental degradation of the opposite pole. He's like he's never lived real life. Like he's never lived real life. The education of all children from the moment that they can get along without a mother's care shall be in state institutions. Marxism is a program of indoctrination and propaganda from day one. And the minute control is lost of the forces of propaganda and education, they lose. It begins to unravel. So it's no accident that the modern powers that be are unalterably opposed to private education and school choice and those kinds of things. Public education all the way. Or did you think that they just want to make sure that kids know their math and science? No, not about math and
That'd be
science.
nice if they taught.
You want to know math and science, you go to a private school or you get homeschooled. Because the homeschool kids and the private school kids run circles around the public school kids in that terrain. Take away a nation's heritage and they are more easily persuaded. So you can see how Marxism is not just a philosophy of economics or class struggle. It's like there's a guy named Saul, what's his name from the 60s? Saul Alinsky. Yeah, Rules for Radicals. How to subvert, rules for activists. How to subvert institutions and gain control, that sort of thing. You can see how much that is fundamentally Marxist. Right here it is. So you have to undermine the nation's heritage, its history, and then you gain control of people and their minds. Theory of communism may be summed up in one sentence: abolish all private property. Here's the problem. Karl Marx was the happy I grew up in a wealthy family. It's this way all the time with Western intellectuals. Happens over and over and over again. Rousseau, all of them. It's the same thing over and over and over again. They're all, and it's true today. A lot of the people causing trouble on the kids causing trouble on the streets are from wealthy New England homes. Columbia University. It's all wealthy kids that go to that school. That's where that's the hotbed. Portland. That's what it is. It's a Marxist thing. And so he wants to abolish all property, probably except for his own. He wants to pull capital out of the hands of the wealthy, except for his own. So I'm going to sum up my view on Karl Marx as a complete and total fraud and a grifter. And you're going to hear me use that word grifter. We should put a bell right here. I thought about it, but it would get annoying. So every time I use the word grifter or grift, you ring the bell and watch it add up. And so we're going to talk about Marxism as the greatest grift in the history of grift. Makes the Wizard of Oz look like a wizard.
What's your definition of grift then?
The guy who's gonna talk you out of your money. Well, what?
God, man.
The con man. Did you see the movie The Sting? Paul Newman and Robert Redford? One of the great movies. Newman and Redford only made 2 movies together. They're both 2 of the best movies ever made. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and The Sting. And The Sting is about a con. They con a Chicago mobster out of $500,000. And that's a grift. They're all con men, they're all grift. And he's, in my view, Marx, not only is Marx a grifter, a fraud, every single Marxist after him is also, I'm just gonna say it, is also a fraud and a grifter.
Hair. Definite.
The hair? Look at all that hair. But here's, let's see, here's Karl Marx. Let's see, Marx came from wealthy family. His father was a successful lawyer. Therefore, he received a good education, opportunity to study at prestigious university, and engage with Europe's intellectual elite, which is probably what he really craved. It was a direct result of his social status shaped by capitalism. Was not a representative of the working class, but it's typical in that world. You speak on behalf of those that you have no association with and insulate yourself from, and probably have contempt for. I've thought for a long time that Marxists loathe the working class, and people are beginning to figure it out.
Either that, or they hate their own class because they hate their parents.
They may hate their
So
own.
they
may-
say they want the opposite. They say they want the opposite, but then if it was forced on them, they wouldn't like it.
They may say they hate them, but they want the benefits.
Right.
Economic dependence on capital is even more evident through his close collaboration with Engels. Engels was the son of a wealthy industrialist. There it is again, Frederick Engels. There's 3 names: Marx, Engels, and Hegel. And I'll stake my life, Hegel was the same thing. None of these people came from poor upbringings. It's not like Marx was born poor and struggled, and so when he grew up, he had a bone to pick with capitalism because he was poor. None of that is ever true. None of that is ever true. That's always these wealthy, it's the sons and daughters of wealthy families. Usually they've been wealthy through generations. They live, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from, the bartender made congresswoman. She lives in this exclusive, insulated neighborhood in Massachusetts, I think. It's, is it New York? Oh yeah, it's the Bronx girl. It turns out she's not from the Bronx. That's all pretend. She's not a Bronx girl. She's this is what she is. So we're back to fraud.
And they keep on electing.
Well, it's just like I'm saying, they want us all to give away our guns. We shouldn't have guns, but then they have their own security guards.
Exactly right. Okay, so that's my view of Marx. I'm just gonna state it and dare anyone to argue with me about it. We can talk about Marx and his minions. It's so discredited. It just will not die. It's well, there's an analogy here somewhere. It's the tardigrade of political philosophies. You know what a tardigrade is? He does. They do. It's like this little, how big is it? Microscopic animal that cannot be destroyed, man. They don't die. It's unbelievable. You can go look it up. They're like the tardigrade of the political philosophy.
When the kids were in school, we learned that his children
Quite a few of them died of starvation, because he was living off the endos, I guess. Anyway, his wife would beg for, for food to feed her children.
So what I'm interested in is identity as a foreshadowing for later. In the Marxist view, identity is closely linked to the concept of false consciousness. False consciousness refers to the distorted understanding that individuals have about their own social position and the exploitation they experience. In other words, if the powers that be, the powers that be tell you that you're something, you just, over the course of your life, in your upbringing, you just instinctively believe it. But you're really not that. They breed into you a false consciousness, which allows them to continue to exploit you. So you becomes a means of exploitation for their benefit. That's how Marx. That's the identity that he's talking about. That continues to this day. Here it is. The ruling class uses ideology to promote false consciousness among the working class, making them believe that their interests align with those of the bourgeoisie. This is going to be replaced. Cultural Marxism is not about the working class. Marxists argue that false consciousness prevents the working class from recognizing their shared class interests and uniting against the ruling class. This is very communist or Marxist. Let's see, identity is not only shaped by economic factors. Now we're getting into the more modern version, I think, but also by other forms of oppression such as gender, race, and sexuality. And that should start to sound very familiar. These forms of oppression are interconnected. So now we're into intersectionalism, the interrelatedness of your various experiences of oppression based on identity, because you're a, pick one, Black, female, lesbian. You have intersectionality there, where you have various types of oppression from those three directions, if you will. Women and racial minorities often face additional barriers in accessing resources and opportunities due to their social identities. That sounds very reasonable. There's a lot more to it than what they're saying. All right, so anyway, that's identity and Marxism. So the Marxist then wants to control your sense of identity. And one of the things that he's going to do is replace your sense of false identity that the bourgeoisie or the oppressors, to use the modern language, have nurtured in you, with what they call your true identity of oppression, but which of course is simply another false consciousness.
Maybe a little bit ignorant, but what about this does Marx see as good? What is he claiming is positive in this? Because right now it just sounds like everyone's gonna be unhappy.
Marx believed in the inevitable. Marx blamed all. Look at his quote here. Marx blamed all. Remember what he said about accumulation of wealth at one pole is at the same time accumulation of.
Misery on the other.
By accumulation, he means centralization of. The centralization of wealth in the hands of the bourgeoisie, those who control the means of production, produces misery, agony of toil, slavery, ignorance, brutality, and mental degradation in the working class. So if you abolish the centralization of wealth, all of these things disappear.
His message is,
Some kind of magic.
his message is that everyone will be treated equally.
Egalitarianism.
Fairness, and he may even use the word justice.
Yes.
So he would say, I will create an environment where
Yes.
everybody is on the equal plane. You can all get your groceries at my stores and pay the same prices and
Make the same money.
make the same money.
Live in the same quality of house.
So that's his sales job.
That's to encourage them to all have a same view of themselves as they do of everyone else around.
Correct.
Yeah, you're a cog in the working class map.
You lost your, as Barry said, individuality.
It's no
You no
individual.
longer an individual, it's part of the conglomerate culture.
his mind, the goal is 5 months. Everybody's the same.
Correct.
Except him.
except for him. Yeah, except for him. He's safely off to the side, like all the Marxists are. He's
And
safely off to the side.
he's
yeah.
the, if I use the term Messiah, to bring that along. Because he is able to create a culture, a commodity, if you will, where everybody is equal and I am the benefactor. I am the,
I'm not gonna say that part out loud. That's the quiet part that you don't say out loud, right? That there are benefactors to these people. So here's,
gracious benefactor.
the point is equality of outcomes.
Yeah.
One of the great buzzwords today is disparate outcomes. That the way you determine whether a system is just is the outcome. Equity. It has the same outcome for everybody. So if you look at a city and there are more of one type of group arrested than another, that's unequal outcome. And the only cause of that can be injustice in some form, like racism. There can be no other cause of that, disparate outcome. So you have to create equitable outcomes. And you have to do whatever it takes to create equitable outcomes. That's one of the tenets of Marxism.
Sounds a little like the movie The Matrix to me.
The Matrix, that's an interesting, let's talk about the Matrix. I got a lot to say about the Matrix for a number of reasons. Not the least of which is the two, who were the two directors of that movie? The so-and-so brothers? Somebody, they're now the so-and-so sisters.
They are?
Yeah,
They are.
you can look it up. Yeah.
But there's a huge
How
difference
wise of them, right?
in equity and equality.
Yeah, and I would say it this way. Equity is a false god, and equality is a myth. Equality doesn't exist anywhere on the earth at any time in any realm. Equality
right.
doesn't exist. There is no two people are equal. It doesn't make any sense to say that I'm equal to so-and-so. I'm not equal to Michael Jordan, either on the basketball court or in any number of other ways, right?
Neither am I.
So
I'm a total klutz.
I view equity, I view these things like equality as false gods. That in the pursuit of, you can destroy the system that provides the most benefits for the most people. But that's another, now I'm a total activist. I'm just, now I've definitely taken a side. I've kind of held it off till now, but these to me are false gods. And we're gonna, in my view, find that this is a religion. It's a world religion at this point, and we'll talk about that too. Which is now it's now fracturing at the seams, thank God, literally, I think, but we'll get back to that as well. At any rate, the reason that I care about Marx now is this identity thing and how they understand identity, because now take away the economics of the thing and replace it with intersectional oppression from various directions, and now you're getting into cultural Marxism. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But for the moment, it's all based in Marxism. So let me say this about the grift. Ding, ding. Marxism starts in every form that it takes. You can pick any you want, all the way up to North Korea. There's no more privileged people in a Marxist society than the most Marxist of them. They reap all the benefits. And the people they claim to speak on behalf of are the most brutalized every single time. And to the United States, it's exactly the same thing. But it starts out as an ideology. Then it becomes an activism. That would be Leninism, for example, in the Bolshevik Revolution or coup in 1917 at the end of World War I. Becomes an activism. Then it becomes the orthodoxy. That's Leninism. 1920s, and then Stalinism, 1930s, Maoism, 1950s. So it goes from an ideology to an activism to an orthodoxy to a bureaucracy. It becomes bureaucratized. That's the Soviet Union, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then it becomes a grift. As these people figure out how to benefit from this bureaucratized life and make their way to become beneficiaries. Oligarchy, that's exactly right. There's no more oligarchic system in the world than the Marxist one in its most mature stage. That's when it becomes a grift. And then everybody's trying to grift off of it. That's exactly what's going on today with cultural Marxism. And DEI, we're finding that out. We'll get back to that. Those three letters, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll talk about that later. But those are the phases. I just made this up. I didn't, not on this spot, but I thought about this a lot. And those to me, and I want somebody to tell me why I'm wrong, those are the stages of Marx. If Marx had a view of the stages of history, you know, the dialectic, that end results inevitably, because he had an idea of the inevitability of history, that it inevitably ends in a utopia. My response is, no, we already know what Marxist utopia looks like. It looks like North Korea today. It looked like the Soviet Union in the 80s. It looked like communism, and it looked like Maoism in the 70s. It looked like Castroism in Cuba. That is the utopia. It always looks the same. There's no difference between a Marxist utopia that they call communism and a dystopia. It's the same thing. So the inevitability, they're right. There is an inevitability to the communist timeline, but we're not waiting for some utopia to come to be. The end stage happens in every case in front of our eyes, and it always looks the same. So, and then in the midst of that dystopia, there's the grifters, ding ding, sitting safely off to the side. Like,
And yet the Marxists say capitalism is oppressive to the people.
yeah, they're really good at propaganda. That's the only thing they're good at, propaganda. Yeah. The power that they can hold over people's minds is unbelievable. Until you see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you see it everywhere. We'll talk more later.
So basically, it just comes down to is they want to control people. I mean, if you look at all the countries that's had the probably some of the poorest countries, there's no actually no equality.
Never.
They're all poor. They're just suppressing the people that are under these rules.
Except for the ones at the top. Yeah. Which are the most doctrinaire Marxists or communists or, you know, whatever. Yeah.
And just, like that book I read by a Christian, basically family is trying to do away, he tries to do away with family and everything else, so.
This Marxist philosophy has infiltrated the church. We will talk about that. We have the unseen hand of God present always and everywhere. There is an inevitability to history, but it's not an inevitability that any human has control of. It's an inevitability of the return of the king. And that's the arrow that no one can subvert. And so no matter what happens, it makes no difference. You know, like I said last week, you know, don't be surprised if when this brutal regime in North Korea finally dies, and we're allowed to be, and you know, that society opens up and we're allowed to go in. There's gonna be a lot of misery, but don't be pleased with surprise if there's a thriving church in North Korea. We can talk about that later. I just want to introduce it for now. It's been a long time introducing it, but that's Marx. Then there's, so that's half the equation there. My favorite grifter in history, grifter in chief, the chief grifter, because he passed his grift on so successfully to future generations of grifters who continue to grift to this day.
I think we could also use the word liar.
All
And
grifters
we
are
know
liars.
and we know who is the father of lies. So we know who they're really serving.
Now, Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin grew up, let's see. Charles Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859. And I'm going to say that if Charles Darwin is the father of formal, in my view, formal nihilism. He gave the foundation to the nihilistic sense with his theory of evolution. Marx is in some sense an attempt to put purpose back in history. History actually, Charles Darwin, the implication of, by inference, the implication is obvious from Darwinism. You mean we thought that the history was headed somewhere, that creation existed for a purpose, and it's not? And Darwin says that's correct. The only thing there is simply differential reproduction. The ongoing battle to pass on your genes. That's it. That's not even that's just simply that's not even a purpose. That's just life. And that's all there is. There's nothing else. Marx said, well, here's where history really is headed. And then he starts talking about the eventual the eventual victory of the proletariat taking control of the means of production and magically producing Happy Land, where everybody gets their Happy Meal for free, or something, I don't know. So it's interesting how they're kind of two sides of a coin there. So let's talk about Darwin. And the way that I'm going to do this, now we introduce the concept of naturalism. We have theology, the study of God and his theology and natural theology, the study of God and his creation. That would be theology and natural theology. Darwinism wipes all that away. There is no study of God because there is no God. As Friedrich Nietzsche would say a little bit later, God is dead. As Marx would say, I want to see the abolition of God himself, the very notion. So Darwin gives the what do you call that? The foundation for that, the scientific foundation for doing that. Now I forgot why I'm saying all this. So now that we can move past theology and natural theology, we can get real about life on planet Earth. But the problem is you have fundamentally discredited the very notion of purpose and introduced by nature, by the very nature of the thing, nihilism. What is nihilism? Let's do a little reminder. Let's see. The universe exists for no purpose, has no end in mind, is destined for extinction. Human life is meaningless, insignificant, and has no intrinsic value. These are brute, what do you want to call it? Inferences. These are inferences, direct inferences you can make from the theory of evolution. Period. How do you get around this? And what comes, of course, with this is no external morality as well. There is no such thing as a moral fact of the matter. Moral facts disappear.
And no accountability.
And no accountability. Yeah, what does accountability mean? I can be stronger than you. If you shoot my wife, I can kill you. Sure. But that's just vengeance. That's not wrong. It's just, that's the lion taking vengeance on the hyenas because they got the cub or something. That's all. The lion parades around the hyena in his mouth. He's needing nothing. He's doing nothing either right nor wrong. Neither one of them. He's just doing. That's the survival of the fittest. which maybe we can talk about that later too. But at any rate, this is nihilism, which is the offspring of naturalism, the logical and necessary inference of naturalism. So what is naturalism? A few years ago, 2018, I spoke at Covenant Life. They were at Hannah Community Center, I think at the time, pre-COVID, BC, before COVID. I've redefined BC. BC is March 16, 2020. You know, 2 years, this is 2 years BC. This is 2 BC, 2 years before COVID. I spoke on Genesis chapter 1, and I wrote up, I probably spent hours on this, trying to encapsulate, set up Genesis chapter 1. And so I'm just going to read it, because I read it again and I went, you know what? I'm standing by every bit of this. I think it's pretty good. So I'm just going to read it. Charles Darwin, I had to get subversive right off the bat, married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, a Unitarian. He was a Unitarian who had 10 children, published The Origin of Species in 1859 and reshaped the very definition of science. And from that day to this, the scientific and education establishments have waged total war against the simple, straightforward proposition that opens the Bible. Those are two sides of the same coin, by the way. Education and science, the scientific establishment, education establishment. Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the decades that followed the publication of Darwin's Origin, this proposition was gradually banished from both science and education, not primarily based on the evidence, not at all based on the evidence, but by the rules. It was banished by rule. It's been replaced with its opposite, that physical reality is all the reality there is, matter plus energy, that physical law and only physical law governs the universe, that the universe is a closed system of entirely physical cause and effect, that therefore everything that happens can, at least in principle, be explained scientifically, that there are no powers operating outside the confines of space and time, that all life descended from a single, very simple, single-celled common ancestor. These are the central tenets of modern naturalism. Naturalism is now the supreme dogma of modern science, and it is built on Darwinism. Belief in the common descent of all life from a single common ancestor, which was itself the product of purely naturalistic forces. If naturalism has a sacred quest, it is the quest for life's common ancestor. A quest, by the way, that remains utterly unsatisfied. In the words of Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist wholly committed to the Darwinian framework, speaking about how life originated on planet Earth, I have no idea, and neither does anybody else. Interestingly, a Pew Research poll in 2009 found that 1/3 of scientists believe in God and 51% believe in a higher power of some kind. They're not even able to convince their own side. This hunch about a creator goes back to Darwin himself. This is the second edition. All living things have much in common. Therefore, I infer that probably all the organic beings which have ever lived on this earth have descended from one primordial form into which life was first breathed by the creator. So there's some kind of deistic Darwin right there. That won't last. He will change his tune. He will get his mind right. As naturalism advanced in the century following the original publication of Darwin's book, the creator himself was cast off as an unnecessary and even dangerous appendage to the scientific quest for the origin of life, until finally atheistic naturalism became the only permitted framework for all scientific investigation. In 2018, that's when I was writing, there is no place for a creator in modern science. It is atheistic to its core. Darwinism is naturalism's article of faith, as much as Jesus is for the Christian. Darwinism serves the same function for the naturalist that Genesis 1:1 serves for the Christian. It is naturalism's creation story, because even the naturalist craves an answer to the question of the origin of life on planet Earth. The problem is they don't have it. They don't have any explanation. It's the great question mark. That in the beginning, their Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, I have no idea, and neither does anyone else, says Richard Dawkins, one of the most famous naturalistic evolutionists alive today. A doctrinaire, dogmatic defender of the naturalistic framework. He had a discussion with a woman named Iana Percy Ali, who was an ardent atheist, who was an ardent defender of naturalism, I think, in the early 2000s. And she apostatized from Islam. And in 2023, and so she was part of his mindset. And they were all on the same team. And they were all part of a group called the New Atheists. And they were gonna expunge faith from culture because it was so damaging. Not only did she apostatize from from Islam, but in 2023, she became a Christian. And so she was recently on a panel with Dawkins, and she was talking about her faith. She's got an interesting couple of really interesting, she's very popular on college campuses because you have to listen to her because she's a Black female. So she goes on campus and she's very educated and very smart. If she goes on campus, the white kids are not allowed to, they're not allowed to berate her or be mean to her. So they have to listen to her and they have to be nice to her. So she answers questions and stuff like this. Ayan, I'll send it in the link. Yeah, I'll send you a link to a YouTube video I was watching yesterday. But at any rate, this now opens the door to nihilism. Not only is there no purpose in life or in the universe, period, it's ruled out by definition. We don't even have any idea how life originated. There is just the endless struggle to reproduce. Where morality? Where, so that's Darwinism. So you put Darwinism, you replace the creator, you replace that religious narrative now with Darwinism, and suddenly the universe becomes ice cold. And holy schmoly, does it get tough to make sense of your life and your identity? And that's when we come out of the 1800s, man, the effect of that on culture, wow. That's at the academic level. At the populist level, the creator is still there. He didn't go anywhere. He does not care what academics think of him. It doesn't matter what movies get made. It doesn't matter what the newspapers say. God is unaffected by any of that. God works directly in the human heart. He does his thing, and you guys are going to lose. God wins. That's the story of Revelation. That's the story of Matthew 1:1 to Revelation 22, whatever it is. God wins. Not only is the victory is not only does he win, the victory is won.
Predetermined.
Yes. Thank God. Who gives us the victory? Is that
Thanks be to God who gives us the victory.
yes, that's exactly right.
Oh,
So we'll go ahead and stop there.
Now, I was glad in the science book that we have, I went to a Christian school, and the Christian, the science book was written by a Christian, but there was a quote. He quoted Darwin just before he, passed away. And he said, "I just made this up because I did not want to believe there was a God that created the heavens and the earth." So before he died, Darwin actually did away with, but by then, Darwin was already so much nobody wanted to believe that he made it up in the first place.
I don't know anything about any kind of recanting that Darwin ever did on his. As far as I know,
I'm just
he's
saying this was written by a Christian.
yeah. He went. It's I understand he went the other way. He eventually expunged this creator nonsense out of his writing, and the future editions of Origin of Species is not going to have that in there. But in a sense, it doesn't matter. He's on the wrong side of history. Marx is on the wrong side of history. Anybody who's not on God's side is on the wrong side of history. Period. So, Team Jesus is where the action is, and that's just the way it is. So let's see what kind of comments I get for this stream. All right, I'll go ahead and stop there. Kay, thanks for your input.
You're welcome, and I liked what you said about the history, and I remember reading it separated as his story.
Yeah, yep. Maybe we can talk
Exactly.
about that later too, the divine narrative, but, okay, thanks. I'll talk to you later.
Have a good Sunday. Bye.
That is